Hi, everybody. My name is Trina Pellegrini, and welcome to Cooking Up Murder. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's a really strange kitchen that you're in, Trina. And you would be right. I am not in the kitchen because today's story is too gruesome to cook while I'm telling you about it. And I will give a viewer warning and discretion. The story that I am about to tell you has murder, obviously, sexual depravity, cannibalism of children, and rape. So if this is not for you, heed my warning and don't listen. But if you want to stay and listen, let's get started. The story that I'm going to tell you about is Albert Fish. You ever heard of Albert Fish? It's been said that the character Hannibal Lecter, apparently Hannibal Lecter had 4 different serial killers, bad guys, kind of all wrapped into one. It wasn't just one. But the story is that Albert Fish was one of them. Although Hannibal Lecter never ate children. And that's all that Albert Fish eats. So if you're ready, let's get started. So Albert Fish was born on May 19th, 1870 in Washington, D.C. He was the youngest of 4 children. His father was 43 years older than his mother. So when Albert was 5 in 1875, his father, who was 80 years old, dropped dead of a heart attack while he was at work. Now, Albert's father had been a captain on a boat, a river boat captain, and then later he became a fertilizer manufacturer. But he died of a heart attack, and now Albert's mother could not afford to keep him. So Albert's mother put him in an orphanage when he was 5. Orphanages back then were not the greatest. I mean, they're not the greatest today, but they were even worse back then. The kids in the orphanage would beat Albert. They would, it was 5, so they would beat him up, and they would take pleasure in just really beating the crap out of him. The problem was Albert liked it. Albert discovered at a very young age that he liked pain. And when these boys were giving him the beat down, Albert would get an erection. Albert didn't really understand why, because again, he's really young, but every time he would get beaten, he would get an erection. And this was, maybe the first foray into him learning that pain causes pleasure. So when Albert was 10, his mother got a government job and she started earning money. And so she came and she got him out of the orphanage. She took him home with her. I couldn't find anything about what happened when he came home. I'm assuming he stayed with her. However, when Albert was 12, he met this young boy that worked at the telegraph office. And he started having a homosexual relationship with him. Now, this young boy introduced him to drinking urine, golden showers, and coprophagia, I think is how you say it. It is eating feces. Yum. Now you see why I'm not cooking, and we're not even to the bad part yet. So Albert has this relationship with him, and that, again, just keeps feeding into Albert's crazy. So by the time 1890 rolls around. Albert is 20 years old, and he decides that he's going to move to New York City. So he moves to New York City, and he says he became a male prostitute. He also became a house painter. I guess prostitution wasn't paying all that well. So he becomes a house painter as well. He says that's when he started raping young boys. And the young boys that he liked were 6 and under. He would also go to the public baths on the weekends so that he could watch all of the young men undress. They would go into the baths, and so they're all walking around naked. He would go and watch them as well. However, Albert's mother in 1898 said, enough of this. You need to get married. So she arranged a marriage for him to a woman that was 9 years younger than him. He was 29 at the time. She arranges a marriage to a woman named Anna. They get married, and they proceed to have 6 children. So obviously he goes both ways. However, he's married to Anna, but he's still going out. He's having his male lovers on the side. One male lover introduced him to this wax museum. And in the wax museum, apparently there was organs that were dissected, and they would show you kind of what they look like. And Albert became fascinated with a penis that had been dissected. That was just his thing. And that's when Albert began the self-mutilation. Later in the story, when he was caught, because thank God he was caught, they found that he had 29 sewing needles. When women would sew, he had 29 sewing needles stuck in his groin. I digress. Back to the story. So he's married. He's doing his house painting now, and in 1903, he gets arrested for grand larceny, and he gets sent to Sing Sing. It didn't say how long he was in there. It just said that he had a really good time, because now he's in a place that only has men, and the only source of sex that any of them can have is with other men, which Albert liked. So let's see. In the next thing that I could find was in 1910, Albert meets an intellectually challenged young man, 19 years old. His name was Thomas Kedden, and Albert decided that he was going to kill Thomas Kedden. But before he was going to kill Thomas, he wanted to dissect a penis. He cuts off half of Thomas's penis, and he said, "I'll never forget the screams that he screamed or the look that he gave me when I did it." Well, no shit. Then he changed his mind and decided that he was not going to kill Thomas because it was really hot and he was afraid that the smell would attract too many people. I mean, good for Thomas. And that he was just going to put some peroxide on the severed penis with some Vaseline, wrap it up, and give Thomas $10 for the trouble. And that's exactly what he did. And he left, and he said he never looked back. He never wondered what happened to Thomas. He just wanted to forget about it. So that was failed for him. In Then the next thing that I found was in 1917, Albert's wife left him. Now they have 6 children, and she left the 6 children with him. They were renting out a room in their house, and she fell in love with the boarder that was there. And so she left with him. So Albert raised his 6 children. By all accounts, later down the road, Albert was a great father and a great grandfather. It does not compute to me, but okay. So from 1919 to about 1930, Albert continues raping and killing young boys. He claimed that he had, and he wasn't specific, so we're still not sure if it was 100 boys that he killed, 100 boys that he raped, or a combination of the both. That we don't know. So in May 25th, 1928, a young man named Edward Budd put an ad in the New York Post, I think it was called. He lived with his family. They lived in a tenement, and he wanted to get out of the city. He was 18 years old. He was a strapping young man. He hated living in the stinky city and wanted to live in the country. So he put an ad inquiring about work in the country. So that was a Friday. On that Monday, which would be the 28th, Albert is now 58 years old. Albert goes to Edward Budd's house and knocks on the door. Mrs. Budd, Edward's mother, opens the door. "Can I help you?" He says, "Hi, my name is Frank Howard. Is Edward at home?" She said, "No, Edward is not at home. Can I help you with something?" And going to be a little confusing, so remember, Albert is Frank. That's his fake name right now. So Frank says, "I saw his ad in the paper and I want to hire him." She is super excited. So she hollers for her daughter to come out and go get her brother. He was down a couple of apartments at his friend's house. This little girl comes out and runs down and gets her brother. Brother comes back and meets with Mr. Howard, Frank. In the meantime, while they're chatting, another young lady walks into the room, 10-year-old Grace Budd, and Albert is just fascinated with her. He sees her and he just cannot stop looking at her. He's just, wow. Now, Albert's plan was to kill Edward. He wanted Edward. He was a little intimidated and even said, You're a lot bigger than I thought you were going to be." And Edward said, "Is that a bad thing?" "Oh, no. Once Albert saw Grace, and by all accounts, she was a beautiful little girl. Once he saw her, he changed his plan. So he tells Edward, and by the way, Edward had asked if he would also hire his friend Willie. And Albert said, "Absolutely. And I'll pay you $15 a week." So that would be about approximately $250 in today's money a week. So Edward and his family were very excited. So Albert told them, "I'll come back on Saturday and pick you boys up. So you have a week to get all of your affairs in order, and I'll come back and pick you up." On Saturday, Edward received a telegram from Frank Howard saying, "I'm very sorry, I can't be there today, but I'll be there tomorrow. I had some business that came up." On Sunday, I want to say that it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, Albert shows up at the door. He has a basket of fresh strawberries and something called pot cheese, which I did not know what that was, so I had to go and look it up. And it's basically like a cottage cheese. And he told Mrs. Budd that it was from his farm. That was why he was hiring Edward. He had a farm, and one of his farm hands were leaving, and he needed someone to take his place. There was no farm, by the way. He goes in, he said they invited him to lunch. He goes in, they sit down, they talk. He meets Mr. Budd, Grace's father. He sees Grace, and he was always very flashy. He really wanted to impress the Budds. He pulled out a wad of money, and you have to remember, this is 1928. There were not a lot of rich people around, and these people were poor. He pulls out a wad of money and he asked Grace to count it. And it was $92, which I should have done the calculation. I forgot, but it was a lot of money. If $15 a week was $250, this is a lot more. They're just sitting there looking at, oh my gosh, this man has money. This is so good. This is so good. So Albert, AKA Frank now, says, my niece, it's her birthday today, and I have to go to her birthday party. So I'm not going to stay. I'll come back later and pick up Edward. Oh my gosh, you know what? My niece is about the age of young Grace here. I think she should go with me to this party. Now, Mrs. Budd was like, oh no, but Mr. Budd was like, yeah, Grace never gets out of the apartment. Let's let her go. Mrs. Budd asks, where is it? He gives an address. Livingston and 135th. Finally, Mrs. Budd says, okay. She goes, she gets Grace's most beautiful dress, which was a beautiful white dress. She put her little bonnet on. She had little gloves. She looked beautiful. She says, be good, have fun, and I'll see you this afternoon. And they never saw Grace again. They did call the police because their daughter is not home, not sent over. A detective came over to their house, Detective William King. He questioned them. He asked to see the telegram that they had received, and it was missing. Albert had taken it. It was laying on the table, and he put his coat and his hat over there, and he took it because he knew what he was going to do. He didn't want to leave any evidence. They can't find that. They tell the whole story about the ad in the paper. This detective, he was a bulldog. I want to say about 4 years into Grace missing, he had a nervous breakdown because he wanted to solve this case so bad. He was seeing Grace everywhere. He had a timepiece like they had back then that he kept in his pocket, and he would pull out and flip open. And in the inside, he kept a picture of Grace. So he had a nervous breakdown, and he ends up going into the hospital over this. He can't find Grace. It's driving him nuts. What happened to this little girl? In the meantime, and I'll tell you what happened to Grace, but before I do, Albert had a very bad habit. Albert loved to write nasty letters to women. For example, if he was living in an apartment, and one thing that I read, he was living in this apartment and there was a little boy. He wanted to take the little boy to the movies and he kept bugging the mother. She was the landlady there, that he wanted to take this little boy to the movies. And she kept saying no. He was probably 4 or 5 years old. And she kept saying no. And so one day Albert got so pissed that he wrote her a letter. He called her a bitch. He called her all kinds of names, the C word, just really, really nasty. And he would do this. He would just pick a woman out of a paper and just write her the nastiest letter. So, and I bring that up because now we have handwriting samples. There's Albert had a certain way of making an H. And now we have all of these letters out there floating around that later come into play. So, what Albert did with Grace, before he went to the Buds apartment, he stopped by a hardware store and he bought one of the sturdiest saws that he could find. And he was walking to the Buds. He stopped and bought the strawberries and the pot cheese. I guess apparently back then you could just walk up to like a newspaper stand and say, hey, can you hold this package here for me for about an hour? I'll be back. And they would, and then you gave them like a quarter or something. So that's what he does. He walks up to this newspaper stand, asks the boy there, can you keep this? I have some shopping to do. And boy says, sure. He goes over to the Buds apartment. He talks to them. He gets Grace. Now he swings back by and he picks up his saw. He gets on the train with Grace because he had been doing research and he found a house out in the country that he was going to take her to. It was an abandoned house. They get on the train and they go to the stop that they have to go to. I don't know how they know this, but I'm assuming somebody reported it. They get off the train and Grace says, oh no, Mr. Howard, you forgot your package. And she gets back on the train and she goes and gets the saw. I'm assuming that a witness said that because how else would we know unless Albert told them later? It wasn't very clear. So they walk to this abandoned house and Grace was fascinated with flowers. She just loved flowers. She was very nervous. Albert said that she didn't have a gift to give to the birthday girl. So Albert told her, once we get there, there's a field of wildflowers and you can go and pick the flowers while I go inside. I'm going to set up the surprise. He leaves her outside the abandoned house and he goes inside and he said that he took off all of his clothes because he didn't want to get any blood on them. And he went to the window and he called for Grace to come inside. And she came inside. She went up the stairs into the bedroom where he jumped out of the closet. When she saw him and he was naked, that she screamed she was going to tell her mama. And he said that he strangled her and he did not rape her, although while he was strangling her, it excited him very much and he did ejaculate twice while he was doing it. He then proceeded to cut her up. He cut off her head. He took the meat off of her body, the good parts, as he said, and he took it back to the room that he was staying in so that he could eat it. He disposed of the rest of her body. So now, back to the detective. This goes on for years. Albert does not get caught, and Grace is just gone. They don't know who this Frank Howard is. The telegram that Edward had received was gone. So Detective King had the idea of finding the original telegram that was sent. They knew the day that it was sent, and he literally went through thousands of telegrams. It took forever, but he finally found it. And that's what I said when I said this guy was a bulldog, because he was determined that he was going to solve this case, and he found that telegram, and he was like, this is the one, I know. Now, he doesn't know because it says Frank Howard. The clue and what eventually led to him getting caught was the stationery that he had written the original message on. Detective King goes to this company. I don't remember what kind of company it was, but it was a big company. They had about 400 employees. And he goes in and he talks to the owner, and he says, I need to know who wrote this and how they got a hold of this stationery. The owner was not very cooperative, and he starts just, kind of asking around, and the janitor, amazingly, was very nervous, and Detective King said, something's going on with this guy. So he starts pressing him. Finally, the guy says, okay, I stole the stationery. I've been pilfering equipment from this company for years. That's why I'm nervous, and I don't want to get fired. So he says to him, do you know Grace Budd? No, I have nothing to do with that. In fact, I left all of that stationery in the last apartment that I lived in. So Detective King asked him, where did you live? He gives him the address, the landlady, all of that. Detective King goes over there, speaks to the landlady, and asks who's staying in that room now. She goes and gets the register because everybody had to sign in. And lo and behold, Albert H. Fish. Remember I said he makes his H really unique. And there it was. The detective says, is he here? She said, no, he left all of a sudden. However, his son John sends him money once a month, and he asked me to hold it here. She let the detective go up into Albert's room. There are clippings from murders, kidnappings, all kinds of stuff all over the room. The detective sat in that room every day for almost a month, waiting for Albert to come. Albert finally shows up, and he hears, because it's right kind of catty corner to where the landlady lived, he hears Albert come and ask for that letter. So he runs out and he confronts Albert and arrests him. Albert tried to stab him with a knife. Albert was like grunting and growling and snarling, all kinds of weird stuff. But he arrested him, took him to a hospital. They took x-rays. They were checking him out to, see what was wrong with him. That's when they found the 29 sewing pins stuck in Albert's groin. And he said that he did that so that he wouldn't do anything else. That was his pain. He also loved to flog himself, like with the what are they called, the old cattle tails or something like that. He would just love to, beat himself kneeling on the floor naked. So that was in 1935 that Albert got arrested. They had a trial. A lot of people came out, a lot of doctors came out and said pretty much that Albert was crazy. There were some other victims that were brought up. For example, in July of 1924, a 9-year-old boy named Francis was reported missing. Francis McDonald. He was reported missing. He was found hanging in a tree. He had been sexually assaulted, and his left hamstring was almost completely devoid of the flesh. All of the meat from the back of his leg was gone. It was just stripped down to the bone. Also in February 11th of 1927, 3-year-old Billy Gafney was kidnapped. Albert did confess to those. Billy is a really hard one because, and I'm not going to read the letter. He had a letter that he wrote about what he did to Billy. Just briefly, he kidnapped Billy, and the reason that he had to confess to this is because he grabbed Billy up and drug him onto a motor coach. When Albert was arrested for Grace's murder, the driver of the motor coach came forward and said, "That's the guy that had this little boy. He was kicking and screaming and crying and calling for his mommy, and this man was just, covering his mouth and holding on to him." And Albert said, and when Albert was in Sing Sing, Billy Gaffney's mother went to visit him and ask him what happened to her son, because Billy was never found. And Albert told her that he took him to this place. He left him. He stripped him naked. He tied him up, and he stuck a dirty gag in his mouth, and he left him there overnight while he went and made this kit. He went back the next day. He whipped Billy. Now remember, this is a 3-year-old, so he whipped Billy. He cut off his ears, his nose. He cut up both sides of his mouth. He cut off his head. He basically took whatever meat he could from Billy's body, and then he disposed of the rest of him. He said that his favorite part was the butt, that he had never had meat so good. He roasted it with onions, and it was better than any turkey dinner he had ever had. Absolutely disgusting. I did forget a very big part because, again, this is This is a very long story, and I'm pretty much doing this from memory. One of the ways that they caught Albert for Grace's murder, and this is a big one to forget, apologies. When I started telling you about the letter writing, Albert wrote a letter to Mrs. Budd. And again, this is about 4 or 5 years after Grace had been gone. He put details in that only him and the Budds would know. For example, he said, I answered an ad. I was supposed to be there on Saturday. I couldn't come until Sunday. I brought the strawberries. I brought the pot cream. I gave Grace 50 cents to buy candy. Grace sat on my lap. I asked if she could go to my niece's party with me. The only good part about all of this is that Mrs. Budd could not read, because the next part of the letter is what he did to her. How he ate her. And he did say that she did die a virgin, that he did not F her. He could have, but he didn't. What a sweet guy. Back to the story. So, Albert was arrested. He went to trial. Everybody's saying that he's crazy. He's just nuts. The judge, however, said, boom, guilty, you're gonna die. They did not mess around back then. I honestly, they did not mess around. So he's arrested in 1935, and on January 16th, 1936, Albert was sent to the electric chair, where he was electrocuted until he died, which I think is great. That is the story of Albert, and Albert, again, does claim over 100 victims. Now, we don't know if that's true or not. I hope that you just stay safe out there, because the world is going mad. Thank you for watching. If you like this, please subscribe to my channel so that you can see whenever I have a new one. I will be cooking on the next one, because it will not be quite so gross. Although, murder's not, good. But I hope that you stay safe out there, and I will see you next time.